I'm basically here to share sort of my experience in seeing different wildlife models around the world. What I'm not doing here is, just showing glitzy pictures from around the globe of animals, which many of you have already seen. But it's more to focus on specifically looking at what different wildlife models work around the world and how they're different. Big disclaimer here, a lot of these cannot be implemented for various reasons in India, and we'll discuss why. But what works and how it works is why I'm here to just share the knowledge of what I have seen personally traveling to a lot of parts in the world. Um, Generally, to just start off with India, I mean, thanks to WPSI and Raghu's reports and stuff like that, I've put some images together from there. But we started with the model in the early 70s, but when Project Tiger came about by establishing tiger reserves in India and tiger reserves throughout the country. Particularly here, we're talking about Bandhavgarh, Kana, the ones in Madhya Pradesh, Panna, Pench, and ideally the protection of tigers has happened inside the protected areas of our national parks in our country, where a lot of us in the tourism field believe that there are more tigers living inside tourism areas of these national parks than outside, just because of whether we are monitoring it, we're patrolling it by our tourist vehicles day in and day out. When we look at these models, it's pretty much similar throughout the country when we look at India. We've gone from, the image on the top left from a very crowded tourism. I believe that's a Bandhavgarh image from many years ago. And then after the Supreme Court order came in, much more controlled tourism. And I think we've gone for the better in many ways by dividing our zones and the number of vehicles that are restricted in going inside national parks for a better wilderness experience. We've embraced diversity over time, going just from male guards to women guards. And many organizations have come up, not only just the Ministry of Environment and Forest, but looking at, TOFT, Ecotourism Society of India, who help regulate that how we build lodges, how lodges are done throughout the country. And a lot of it has not become law as such, which we may need in the future, but we'll get into that towards the end of the conversation. But I want to move away from India for a little bit and start by looking at an Africa examples. We're used to looking at African models as an inspiration for wilderness experiences. Those glitzy images, amazing images coming out of Africa, and I wish we were that. In many times people say that, especially when we are looking with, we're talking to foreign tour operators, but it's much more complex than we think. Africa is a continent, India is a country, always remember that. People make these comparisons, and India in itself, the diversity in India is amazing when you compare Africa as a continent. But having said that, Africa has also done many things towards protection of wildlife, which has worked very, very well. Let's look at the first model as private conservancies. What is a private conservancy? Private conservancies usually come up right next to national parks. This is an example of the Greater Kruger area, looking at the Sabi area, Sabi Sands area, where it's all about exclusivity. All these little game reserves, whether it's Mala Mala, Timbavati, all these little small game reserves are sort of privatized in a way, many located right next to a national park, and there are no fences, usually owned by a family or a corporate group passed down from generation to generation. So in many cases, it's already down to the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren who are maintaining that particular private conservancy. Majority are farms converted back into wilderness areas. Many used to be hunting concessions started to become photographic safaris. In the 70s and the 80s, this great transformation happened from moving from hunting safaris into tourism areas. Having said that, there are still private conservancies that do hunting safaris. In some cases, wilderness was even transported from other regions to reintroduce to make a particular game reserve, which has happened throughout South Africa as well. They employ locals who come from nearby villages located outside the reserve. So just outside the reserve, where sort of very similar to the Indian model, where the villages are located, all the people are coming to work inside these game reserves that are there. And money is put back into communities from the profits earned. Many times it's based on the commitment of the owners on how much of these funds will be allocated for community development. So there is as such no necessary commitment in the contracts to give to the locals, but majority do out of today's principles of sustainability and to support local villages in the areas that they are. But majority of these private conservancies are either on long leases in whichever game reserve areas they are, and they secure thousands and thousands of hectares, anything from 5 to 10,000 hectares to 100,000 hectares, depending on where you are in Africa. These are a lot of the popular ones that you guys may have heard of: Singita and beyond, Kwanwe, Sabi Sabi, Londolozi, Mala Mala, Inyati. And they make lodges of all different categories. So when we look at a particular conservancy, a conservancy can have anything from anywhere from 1 to 6 or 7 different properties based on that conservancy. So they can have one which is budgeted at, let's say, $400 per person per night, and one which is budgeted at $2,000 per person per night. So it totally depends on how much money they spend on making the lodge and the luxuries that go with it, with private vehicles, amazing guides who take you on these safaris. In many cases, these fences have been brought down, so hence they can go into different areas based on whatever concession allows you to go into their areas. They are solely also responsible for safeguarding everything on their land. So whatever wildlife there is, if it's present on their land, whether they reintroduced it or it has come in from its neighbors, they are responsible for securing it. Hence, they fund the anti-poaching unit, they fund science on it for any research that is done on it. So there is a big price tag to maintain these conservancies. Um, but as I said, everything looks great on paper when we look at all these images. But here's getting a little bit behind conservancies. Here's an interesting example that just happened. What is a land claim? Mala Mala Game Reserve is in South Africa, and it's making it possible for whoever was evicted from their land to get it back. Land redistribution to address the racial inequality in land ownership. So let's say that the land was owned by the locals about 100 years ago, and it was snatched from them. During the colonial era, was taken from them, and now in South Africa, for example, they can make a land claim in order to say, this was our land, my great grandfathers were born here, hence it belongs to us. In the case of Mala Mala, the government gave over R1 billion to owners of Mala Mala to acquire land of this particular community. The Lands Claim Commission, which was formed by the government, used to settle this matter, lost its entire budget settling the claim. So the government said, listen, if we have R1 billion, we're going to spend the whole R1 billion to buy Mala Mala and give it to its people. Now, this opened a whole Pandora box saying that can land claim happen all over the country or maybe all over the continent for that matter, because the land was taken from them. What happened was that the community had no capacity to run Mala Mala, hence did a partnership with the original owners to run it. Original owners got paid and the government funds got exhausted. The land rights were given to 960 families to be exact in this community. Almost 8 to 9 years into this deal, majority of the community members have yet to see any benefit from it. And these are all, information that I've gathered through friends that I know and from, of course, media releases. Unfortunately, corruption is widespread, hence only a few at the top of the community benefit in a very big way. This is a lot of money that was given at the end of the day, and who controls it, how the money gets spent. The question that arises in my mind, particularly, that as a private entrepreneurship, Mala Mala and many other private owned conservancies are doing massive work in the communities, schools, fresh water, etc., etc. Now, the money goes into the community fund where there seems to be widespread corruption and only limited amount of people benefit from it. What is the long-term futures of these kind of deals, especially when communities are handed a huge sum of cash? So let's say somebody just comes and gives a village in India, says, here's $1 million, because we took this land from you, hence this money belongs to it. Will the money slowly filter into all the communities in the nearby areas or not? Big question mark there. Let's move away from that model. Let's look at a community partnership model. These are a little bit more newer conservancies that have been formed. This is an example of Sable Alley in Botswana by a company called Natural Selections. The owners of Natural Selections were the original founders of wilderness safaris in Africa. And I feel that they've done a lot of things right. But there is, problems with that system as well. It's a lease agreement between the community and Natural Selection. So no matter what happens, every year, Natural Selections is committed to paying about $250,000, COVID or no COVID, to the community. This is what they give. This is their commitment. Preferential employment, of course, and training for better opportunities to the communities they are in. And 1.5% of their booking revenue goes for other projects like this van that you see on the right, which is the Elephant Express. This particular area of Sable Alley has the highest concentrations of elephants there is in Botswana. Hence, safe passage for school kids is what this van does. Every day it shuttles back and forth between schools and is completely funded by tourism. Realization that in the long term, this may not always be sustainable as there is a risk of tourism revenue drying up. Hence, plans for fundraising through other means are important, and that's what they realize. And they're gearing towards raising some funds from private donors as well. Now, in this particular model, the model I feel is brilliant. I mean, to be able to give a commitment to the community that this amount of money you will get, and we will, and there is a way of, there is a governing council, and it gets redistributed into the villages in the nearby area. And beyond that, 1.5% of the revenue, Natural Selections has decided that we want to give that money back to the community. Now, what happens when something like COVID happens? There is absolutely no tourism revenue that has come in the last 8 to 9 months. They're literally paying out of pocket and bleeding money every day. In this case, they're now running to find donors who can help secure some funding on this. If a community is committed to, let's say, 6 to 7 years, they get this money, and then the 7th year, all these programs are implemented and the money dries up. 1 year, 2 years, the tourism project can go on. But it's inevitable that, you know, if tourism doesn't return to a particular area because of any other reason, then what is the future of that community conservancy? But I do think this is still a brilliant model. Let's look at another one. This is a not-for-profit conservancy, Ol Pejeta. This is in Laikipia in Kenya. This is, you may have seen this picture. This is of the northern white rhino, Sudan, who died. This was the last remaining northern white rhino. This is Ol Pejeta. The model is, it used to all be a beef farm, and 90,000 acres of land was secured in 2003 by Fauna and Flora International, which is a nonprofit, with the help of a generous benefactor. Commercial businesses of agriculture and tourism are still run, and all profits are for reinvestment in conservation community. Mind you, nobody makes money from anything that is generated in this in Ol Pejeta. Everybody is paid a salary. The nonprofit does not make money. That all the money that's generated from it is actually poured back into community. The company is governed by a voluntary board who draws no remuneration. 100% of funds must be used for Ol Pejeta conservation and community development. There is no other person or institution that benefits from any surplus that's made. What's the result? When you look at revenues, 80% from tourism with 70,000 visitors. These can be day visitors, these can be overnight visitors. So just like I showed in private conservancies, there are different smaller lodges which are based inside the conservancy that pay per tourism night dollar, or they lease. 20% from agriculture, mainly from 75 heads of cattle integrated into the conservancy. So they did not let that original farming go away. They just controlled it in a way where they could reintroduce wildlife as well. A certain percentage is also from regular donations. So big donations come in for Ol Pejeta because people love the model. Highest density of wildlife in Kenya outside of Masai Mara. Only place in Kenya to see chimpanzees. They have reintroduced them. Largest black rhino sanctuary in East Africa. Latest in technology used to allow free movement of migratory wildlife. And I'll discuss that in 1 minute. Their research and innovation has been pioneering. They have an outstanding anti-poaching team with generation donations from around the world. Now, looking at, this is a study that TOF did a while ago. When we look at a national park in India, Ranthambore National Park, for example, gets a total funding, this is a few years ago, I believe, for $4.6 million, out of which state and federal funding from the government comes at about 1.8 million, and tourism funding in 2016-17 was about $2.85 million. When we just compare it to Ol Pejeta Conservancy, their total revenue is about $7.5 million. They get no state and federal funding, zero. They get $3 million in tourism funding, and they get about $4.4 million in other funding resources. If you look at Ol Pejeta, here's a map of Ol Pejeta. You can tell that the national park is actually very diverse. It has all the mammals, but on the left side here, here's beef and cattle farming in the middle of it all in these particular areas. Imagine images like this, and you would never think that this is even possible. Elephants, or lions, rhinos, all in the same area where the cattle are also herded. Now, these farmers that used to originally own the land have been re-employed, and these fences have been made where the cows go every night. me and Julian have been, myself and Julian have been lucky enough to actually go to Old Pajeta, and we sit on a board of an organization called Wild Landscapes. And Wild Landscapes, they secured about $1 million to do something very pioneering. So if you see the map, this is Old Pajeta, this is the whole area of Laikipia, and all these smaller conservancies like Old Joki, like El Karama, like Borana, they want to make a fencing corridor through all these conservancies outside of it. So there is no fences between these conservancies. So it allows free movement of rhinos within this particular area. Now, this is just starting. This is, I believe they're still in phase one of it. And when it happens, I think it'll be amazing to see the free movement of rhinos in this whole particular areas. Now, what have we learned from this? That they actually operate a beef farm sitting inside Old Pajeta. Tourism revenue is the major contributor in this area. Major donations also happen that people have supported, and not just one or two benefactors, but thousands of people around the world have supported Old Pajeta for what they're doing. And none of the money is benefits a single person. Everybody's paid salaries. Tourism operators operate their own little businesses and pay a lease, but everything that's made goes back into the conservancy. Now let's look at one more model called African parks. I'm going to play a small video here. And Ritu, if it doesn't play, let me know.
It's playing, Amit.
African Parks was founded in 2000 to effectively manage Africa's protected areas. With 19 parks under management in 11 countries, our footprint has scaled to almost 15 million hectares. These vital landscapes are helping to safeguard Africa's biodiversity, serving as a foundation for a healthy planet and delivering benefits to hundreds of thousands of people. By preventing poaching and the wildlife trade, we are protecting species at their source and our global health and well-being. By protecting critical forests, grasslands, and seascapes, we are preserving essential ecosystem services which deliver clean air and water, food security, and capture carbon to combat climate change. And in securing these natural systems, we're helping to build resilient, sustainable livelihoods for thousands of vulnerable communities. From Odzala's tropical forest in Central Africa, to Enedi's desert sandstone masterpiece in Chad. Hope starts here, with the places that we are protecting now, to ensure a healthy future for us all.
So what is Africa Parks? Africa Parks is a non-profit conservation organization that takes on the complete responsibility of rehabilitation and long-term management of national parks in partnership with governments and local communities. So the government does not have the resources, in this case, the government does not have the resources to manage the national park. They think their poaching is rampant and they don't have the resources to control that. They take government budget. So let's say government has $1 million to secure a particular national park, but that's not enough. They need $3 million to secure it. And they add private funding to it in order to implement a system. Bring in outsiders to train and equip their guards, give them the employment, the locals, train local management, and restore ecosystem. Whereas Africa Parks, their pillars are law enforcement. So they bring in paramilitary, ex-military from everywhere around the world to come and train in different national parks in Africa. They focus on community development in whatever communities there are, because if you don't support the community, you will never be successful in what you're doing. Biodiversity conservation, they support the science, all the studies that happen in that particular area, and of course, in many cases, replan a whole management plan for the national park. Tourism is not a big aspect of theirs, but they do allow some tourism. And if you can get into some of these national parks, the tourism is amazing. I mean, what you see, because it's so raw in many areas, and the management and infrastructure. So hence they bring in a whole management, train the locals, and then leave it to them eventually. But at this point, they're very much involved in the national parks that they are. They don't sort of come in, train, and leave. That's not their principle. They want a long-term protected area sustainability to happen in this. If you see majority of these areas that they are in, whether it's Zambia, Chad, DRC, Angola, Malawi, Congo, Benin, all these particular areas are, generally poorer countries struggling with poaching, but they have amazing wildlife, amazing landscapes in these particular areas. Let's look at Zokuma National Park in Chad as an example of African parks. Zokuma was getting attacked by Somalis for elephant poaching between 2002 and 2010. 4,000 elephants, or 95% of Zokuma's population, slaughtered for ivory. African Park signed a deal with the Chad government to protect this park. From 2010 to 2016, only 24 known elephants were killed. Since 2016, none. Elephants resumed breeding, which means at that point, it's a great sign that this is getting protected. In 2018, rhinos got reintroduced to the park. In 2013, 17 schools built in the area, so the community work is there. Park management plus tourism become the largest employer in that particular area. And in this case, important to note that tourism is particularly used to engage local communities for jobs. But the funding for management comes almost entirely from African Parks budget, which includes the Chad government revenue as well. So in a way, outsourcing a park for better management and protection of wildlife. Where does the money come from? Of course, British royalty is involved, and so are many other organizations, including the European Union, WWF, the U.S. government, and there are many other sources where revenue pours in, and they go lobbying for money in order to protect these national parks. So that in itself is a very different model and maybe ideal for many of these countries, which in Africa. Let's jump continents for a second, and let's go to the PANTANAL. The PANTANAL is, an immense landlocked river delta, one of the best places in the world to see jaguars, anteaters, caimans. It's absolutely brilliant. I've been there twice myself. Sort of looks like Botswana in particular areas, but their story is also very similar. They used to have beef farms all over the place. Protected areas were declared about 40 to 50 years ago. 70% of the land in private hands was taken and no compensation was given. Mind you, this is 40 to 50 years ago. Today, that won't happen. But PANTANAL as an ecosystem is protected. Doesn't matter if it's a national park or not. If you have a farm, you have to respect the rule of a biome. So these farms still very much exist. Their areas, their land has shrunk a lot because they've gone from beef farming to slowly tourism. Whoever still owned private land turned to tourism for revenue. Hence, all tourism properties are on private land. Nobody controls the river. These rivers are open. So if the river flows through your land, hey, it's open and anybody can sort of come in and navigate in these rivers. This is on top that you see is a hotel in the PANTANAL. At the bottom, what you see is called a flotel in the PANTANAL. Now, the hotels are limited. These are all bee farms which got converted, and over time, people built more and more rooms. We went from 8 to 10 rooms to 15 to 20 rooms. Flotels are something that you can just put on the water. It doesn't really require a lot of permits. Hence, it is very limited hotels that are expanding just because it's very complicated to do deals with the Brazilian bee farmers. And today, it's almost impossible to acquire new land in that area. But what they can do is put this flotel up on the river. Now, I want to show you a map here. The cluster that you see, which is the Parque Estadual Cotro das Ocoas, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right, is where majority of the people go. Now, this is not even the main national park. The main national park is up here in Mato Grosso. But Porto Jafre is where this area, which is the dollar signs here, is where all the sort of lodges are based. And Porto Jafre is this town in the nearby area. What happens is everybody goes from Porto Jafre they take their boats into this particular area inside the national park and come back out. They don't go very deep. There are some who have just recently started to diversify in other parts of Brazil as well to see jaguars. But again, it's still very limited. It is sort of like what Ranthambore was about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, where everybody used to flock to Ranthambore to go see the tigers. Hence, they're all going into this particular area. Now, nobody pays park entry fees. Hence, no revenue from tourism goes to government other than normal taxes. There is no cap on number of boats being introduced in this area. The there is no cap on accommodation. So at the moment, I could put a flotel on there, even though because of complicated ownership structure of the farms, there's nobody stopping you from putting a flotel or one of the farmers expanding their farms by another 20 rooms. System is completely based on honor system in terms of park behavior. Now, when I went, mind you, this is 12, 13 years ago, or even more, about 12, 13 years ago, there were very limited boats in the Pantanal that were going to see the jaguars. And yes, you would see 4 or 5 other boats that would come across the jaguar. Over time, what has happened is, sort of what happened in our national parks is more and more jeeps started to come here, more and more boats started to come. It's completely based on an honor system. So the farm owner here has about 10 boats, the farm owner there has about 5 boats. They will all respect and they'll try to keep quiet inside the national park. Now, if I was looking at from an India model, is Pantanal tourism a disaster waiting to happen, or they have really nailed it? I don't know. I mean, this is something that we have to see over time. Going to see jaguars has become very, very famous over time, and hence more and more people are flocking there. But there is no revenue that goes to the government, so they're not liable to really anything. The rivers are open for anybody to navigate. I spoke to a friend of mine who operates in the Pantanal, and he says we voluntarily put a fund together for community development in a particular area. But I think that's a lot because of all the global pressures that are out there today, that you have to do sustainability. And of course, there are very good people out there who want to support the communities living in particular areas. But since government doesn't really issue a ticket, it's all self-regulated. Everything is just on our honor system. Does that work? And this is a question I don't have an answer to, but it's a very good debatable question, I feel. I will leave you with one last video. Gorongosa National Park is in Mozambique, and it's doing wonders. I think what they are implementing in this particular area will be the future for many African parks in the future as well, where a single benefactor has sort of worked together with the Mozambique government and has brought in different experts from different industries, whether it's science, whether it's anti-poaching, everything, to train in this particular area. And they have done wonders over the years. So this is an aspirational video of a great community conservancy owned by the government can be.
Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique is known as one of Africa's greatest wildlife restoration stories. In 2008, the park had only 10,000 large animals. Today, over 100,000. But the Gorongosa project isn't just about rewilding this iconic wilderness. Inspired by the shared vision of Mozambique's former president, Joaquim Chissano, and Nelson Mandela, there's a deep commitment that the park should benefit the local people. The park provides over 600 jobs in conservation, science, tourism, and human development. Our community health workers reach over 100,000 vulnerable people every year. Our sustainable agriculture projects, like growing coffee on Mount Gorongosa, improve the incomes and the lives of farm families. Mandela was right when he said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we build new schools, support teachers, and run many after-school programs like the Girls' Clubs. We're working to keep girls in school so that they can have the same opportunities in life as the boys. And every year, we bring thousands of local children on safari in the park so they can reconnect with their precious natural heritage. Some of them may choose to become part of our team, so we provide many different training courses and internships. Students can even study for a master's degree in conservation biology in Gorongosa. We are showing the world an example of what a national park can be. We are Gorongosa.
And there are many such examples in Africa that we can share. I mean, of course, time is limited, but here's a question that I leave with is saying that in India, we go into a national park, we cut a park ticket, and that's it. This is our responsibility. We wash our hands of it at the end of the day. If there is anything that happens, or the management of the park is not dependent on us, there's major costs that go into maintaining a national park, whether it's anti-poaching unit, forest fires, controlling the poaching. We pay a fee, and that's about it. Every model has its problems. In what we saw in Jaguar country is very different from what we saw in Kenya, what we saw in Botswana is very different. One size fits all is not the answer here. Everything is different in many ways. Community engagement in all of these has to be the top priority. And I think without that, it doesn't. I feel that Project Tiger, once it initially started, and my grandfather was the first director of it, I think community engagement had to be put into that document in a much bigger way. But maybe they didn't see the vision in early 1971 when they actually put that document together. But community engagement, till that's not there, and then till they are not, it's not a part of their lives, they're not participants in it, how do we control what we do, whether it's poaching that happens or forest fires? Are they going to be supporting us, supporting the forest department, supporting their own land, or a major migration is happening, urbanization is happening, where people are moving from the villages to the big cities? Anyways, that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me.